Hello and welcome back to the University of Law podcast. And this episode is really as part of celebration of Dyslexia Awareness Month. So my name is Ruth Le Duc and I am the Student Learning Developer Manager for Neurodiversity at the University of Law. I'm part of the Library and Study Skills Service. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Andrew Grice, a Senior Lecturer in the university's Business School. So hi, Andrew, and thank you so much for joining me today. So do you want to just quickly introduce yourself for us?
Ruth, first, let me thank you for allowing me to join you today. It's absolutely wonderful to be here and be able to share my own experiences. But I am Andrew Grice. I'm a Senior Lecturer in the Business School at the University of Law, where I predominantly lecture on the Masters in Business Analytics program and supervise postgraduate students. And certainly, if you haven't gathered by now, I am actually a dyslexic academic.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Andrew, I wonder if just to begin with, you could just share your story with your own experience, perhaps, of dyslexia and how that came about and how that's kind of shaped your perspective on things.
Yeah, I've listened to many stories about dyslexia, and they're all unique in the process, time, and nature of how people learn about their own dyslexia. And I suppose through mine, the tale might resonate to other people, or even enlighten some people in terms of the journey that we tend to go through. So I was thinking perhaps I should start with long time ago, because I'm that old, but I'm not sure that would actually work. So really, my life hasn't really followed what some might call a normative path. Instead, school seemed more like play than learning. Junior school, I was in remedial classes. Secondary school was fun, but not for academic reasons. And academically, I didn't really enjoy it and didn't have a good time. And I left at 15 with not many qualifications. And most people would probably say it was practically nothing that I actually had. But the signs around dyslexia were there. It wasn't picked up at all. Hardly surprising back in that time, but that still happens today.
Yeah.
But at the age of around 13, 14, I had a Saturday job in a factory and factory shop, which was around 20 miles away from my home. And most Saturdays I was running the factory and shop on my own, which included at times running the manufacturing side and supervising adult staff. So I really started that entrepreneurship aspect of my life very, very early.
Yeah.
But in some way, so in some ways it shaped my life. At 15, I was in business. I was a business individual. And that path shouldn't be surprising given the statistics, which suggest that people who are dyslexic represent proportionally higher in entrepreneurship roles than they do in proportion of society in general. So it's something like 20 to 40% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic, which is really, considering the proportion in society, which some say 10%, some say as high as 20%. So it really is quite significant.
Yeah, and lots of people who haven't followed that traditional route, isn't it? Lots of the time, isn't it? And lots of people who've not followed like a more traditional academic route.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's no surprise when you look at the traits and how dyslexic individuals, fit. Now, when I look back at it, through traits theory, how that connected with me. So just going back to early life. So at 15, I was had my own business. But when I look at the traits and how I developed, it's things like curiosity, as a skill, being visual and a conceptual thinker in how a business worked. Also the use of technology and actually not being afraid at 15 to delegate. I mean, that's quite a skill, and some people just don't get over that. But also have a big picture where you want the business to go. to go,
Mm,
and as well as being an innovator as well.
mm,
All of which right now you've got to do as an academic.
mm,
The roles that are connected to entrepreneurship are surprisingly similar.
mm.
But
Yeah.
having done this business thing, I sold up and I wanted to do something new, and I hadn't really got a clue what I was going to do. But I tried university, and I couldn't go straight into doing a degree. I had to do foundation
Mm,
at university, and then following foundation,
mm,
I did first degree and then postgraduate degree, and
mm,
only after I finished my master's did I find out I was dyslexic.
mm.
So
And
a
it's very
whole,
common that, isn't it, these days? We're seeing lots and lots of people who discover that they are neurodivergent later on in life, aren't we?
yeah, absolutely. But there's so many barriers that I think if we could undo them, would be really helpful to students. But at the same time, there's lots of support in universities now, in terms of study skills, etc., that can help
Mm,
students as well. So
mm, yeah.
the only reason I found out that I was dyslexic was because my partner was doing a teaching qualification. And as part of that teaching qualification, she was looking at coloured overlays.
Mm, right.
So I took some of the colour overlays, just I thought it would be amusing to give it a go. And surprisingly, some of them worked. Some of them didn't work. They really weren't very good for me, but
Mm,
some of them did. So now I wear glasses which have pink lenses. So they are my overlays
yeah.
that I wear for
Right.
reading.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's understanding that maybe you process things in a different way. And I think sometimes when people are at school, they can go through school and college thinking, I'm not as good, and maybe feel that they're not as good as other students or not as clever or not as, and none of that's true. It's just a difference, isn't it?
It is different, and very, very simple things, like, reading these days because of technology is
Mm,
no longer reading.
absolutely.
It's listening. And writing is no longer necessarily writing, it's speaking. So we've kind of, with the use of technology as enablers, are beginning to help people like me and some of
Yeah.
our listeners
It's
to
it's
make life so much easier.
it's been a really good, there's so many innovations now. Perhaps we can talk on about those a little bit more later on. Actually, I'll ask you about that. But I just wondered, obviously that's been your journey through to where you are now as a senior lecturer. And how does your dyslexia inform now your teaching? How do you bring that into your teaching, and in terms of strategies that you use?
There's several parts of what I do. One is the design of the learning and the learning
Mm,
environment, and one is actually the operational activity of maybe a module or learning.
mm,
In terms of the actual design, dyslexic thinking, dyslexic support is built in right from the beginning. There's some wonderful training that made by Dyslexia and Kate Griggs put together with Microsoft, which takes people through. They're little micro courses, which takes people through how to use their technology, and I've embedded that for many years into what I do. So it's all designed with that in mind. Um,
mm,
which includes, I don't mind if people want to use headphones in classes. I don't mind if
yeah,
if people want to speak um, into Word to make it right for them. I don't mind
yeah,
any of that. I
yeah,
want students to come to a learning environment so that they can do it their way.
And it's so important that, isn't it? I mean, I know in my job with study skills, I spend a lot of time working with students to find out how they learn and encouraging them to work with themselves and find the ways of learning that work for them. And that might be different to the person next to them or someone else in their group. And I think that's really important, isn't it? To kind of encourage people to kind of learn in the way that they need to.
I agree, and for me, it goes a little bit even further beyond that. Is within a learning session, physical or whether it be in the virtual environment, if you're working collaboratively, sometimes that knowledge can be lost in using some methods, and it's really the challenge is how do we capture that knowledge to help everybody so that they can take it forward from outside of the class. And it's designing in that way that I find is really, really important. Make it collaborative and inclusive.
Yeah. And then we're not missing anything, are we? Because if we're just delivering stuff, they could talk about multisensory learning, don't they? So, for example, reading and listening at the same time, reading and speaking, listening and writing. And that seems to work really well. And I think by offering those opportunities, we're not missing anything, are we? We're not losing some students, and we're kind of, making sure everybody's got that chance to be heard. So I think that's fantastic, Andrew, and it's so good to hear that sort of stuff happening in classrooms, because it's so I hear from students on in my one-to-ones how helpful that is, when that happens.
But I can go a little bit further on this, and it's really, in designing it this way and colleagues coming and working with me, we're getting a spread. We're getting, it's going out and people can see that things work. And that's really, really important, because design it in a way that's inclusive. It's not just people with dyslexia that actually benefit.
Absolutely.
It's more students, much more students.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got all neurodivergent students, haven't we? And, it's ADHD Awareness Month this month as well. And we know that a lot of these neurodivergent conditions like dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, all of these sort of overlap sometimes. So it's good to think broadly, isn't it, about it as well?
And it also helps international students as well.
Absolutely.
Because we build that in, and they're bringing all this legacy effects as well, and again, design, it does help them as well.
And it's really, I think that's such a good point you've made about bringing everybody in and making sure that everybody's got a seat at the table as such in a classroom, that we're not missing anyone, we're not missing anything, and all the strengths and all the different ways of thinking and all that sort of capital that people bring with them and skills and strengths. I think it's so important. And I was just wondering, I mean, what advice, I suppose, would you give to say potential students who are thinking of coming to university who are dyslexic?
If I consider coming to university as a process, and there is theories around equality, diversity, and inclusion, which consider it as a process. The first thing for me is be prepared to try and get things in early. If you really get taught to the university, make sure you've got or consider your own needs. Get any application in early and start having those discussions early. But also, sometimes these things, if you need things in place, may take some time. But I would strongly, again, go back to that training around the technologies that Made by Dyslexia have. And there are so many things that can work that are free. That we already have in this system, that you can grab onto them straight away. And one of the other things, techniques that I use is the diary. I would be lost without my diary, without my calendar.
Me too.
Absolutely. My line manager's kind of, my diary's always full. And it is because I need to know they've got everything planned, and that's what I have. And sometimes I have to conceptualize in my own mind that some things are kind of fairly fixed and some things are flexible. So if urgent things come in, we can move them along. But for me, make sure you're and talk. I am somebody that's very open, and don't be afraid to try and connect with people that are dyslexic, neurodiverse, etc. But for me, to help students, I am very open about being dyslexic in the classroom.
And I think it's. I mean, there are reasons why I think some people perhaps, unfortunately and understandably, don't feel able to be open about being dyslexic. But I think we're seeing more and more, and I think it's so nice when students see staff at universities who are neurodivergent and or can get in touch with other students who are as well, because I think sometimes people who for example who are dyslexic can sometimes, I find, feel a little bit, well, I'm not quite as good as other students. There's this kind of less than thing that happens. And I think that, that it's so important to try and sort of reframe that, isn't it? And think of things like dyslexia as a different way of thinking and all that is. It's not to deny the challenges, but it's about understanding that, it really is just a different way of thinking, and finding those tools and strategies that you mentioned, about finding those strategies can be really life-changing, can't it? And really helpful.
I think it's as well being quite open about, like I'm saying, I tried different things and I've raised a few technology issues. But it's also recognizing that, people that tend to be dyslexic are quite resilient in because they've gone through quite a lot of battles. But at the same time, for me, being open, what I found is that students have then come forward and said, actually, I didn't want to raise it, but I must tell you that I am. And then it's allowed me to direct students to support. And I think that's one of the reasons that I am open, is because I don't want students to go through what I went through.
That's really something. Honestly, I think that you can't underestimate the impact of that, Andrew. I know it's validating for students, and students feel seen, and it encourages other people to be open. Then, if one person is, then, like you've said, it then encourages other people to become, to be open, and then it's sort of, in a way, it becomes less of a thing, doesn't it? And I think, it can be so, I know when I hear from students where they've said, oh, I found out there's someone else in my group who has dyslexia or has ADHD, or, my tutor said, or, it just helps so much, that I think, to just have that. And I think you're right about support. I mean, we've got our disability and inclusion service who do all the sort of, getting reasonable adjustments in place, exams, that sort of thing, assessment, and of course our study skills service, and we've got all the academic coaches who do great work, and the tutors like yourself. I think there is help out there, isn't there?
There is, and I think there's also a level of thinking, for students. Don't just, everybody has little weaknesses. We all have them. But there are so many strengths that people with dyslexia have. And there's a saying that's around at the moment is, the dyslexic superpower. And that is so empowering when, I say to students, what is your superpower? What are you really, really good at?
Yeah. And it's that kind of, very often it's that, isn't it? It's that sort of, bigger picture thinking, things like creative problem solving, all, making all those links. Very often, I mean, oral skills, like verbal, like presentations and that sort of stuff can be, a real strength as well. So I know that you mentioned before about technology, and I think, can we mention dyslexia now and without technology, because the advancements are so huge now. I mean, how do you think technology and AI are going to be so helpful for neurodivergent students?
I think where there are things that we struggle with, which are quite, fairly homogenous, like, speaking to writing, which is a real skill. That's where I think we will really improve the quality of that interpretation. Will get so much better. It already has improved. The accuracy of Microsoft Immersive Reader or speech to text, huge increase compared to just back from 2019, and that's great to see. The voices and how they speak, when they're reading things to you, again, it feels better when we're listening to that. And our ability to personalize the speed is really, really good as well. So in terms of that, those kind of things that are tailored to an individual that are quite homogenous for me, are likely to get better, which allows us as people that are dyslexic, neurodivergent, to focus on those skills that were other skills, like the creativity that you mentioned, like the big picture thinking, those skills that employers need for the future.
Yeah, I mean, we have obviously a lot of law students, and I think that there's such a lot of reading for certain subjects, particularly subjects like law, isn't there? I think there's just so much reading. I mean, there is for lots of subjects. And I think sometimes students can feel quite overwhelmed with the reading, can't they, at university? And I think that's somewhere where technology is really helping students, isn't it?
It is, and there's a really interesting bit of AI that a colleague used about 10 days ago, of one of my abstracts from the education symposium here at the University of Law, and he used AI to summarize the abstract. And it spoke it in its own voice, and that abstract, because it kind of normalized the language and made it into a conversational piece, it makes it more accessible to some people. So in some ways, expanding what you're saying, there is a lot. Some things we need to know absolute. Sometimes we just need a summary.
Yeah.
I think the summary aspect was really, really quite powerful. When myself and the colleague who I worked with listened to that, we were absolutely blown away by how it reinterpreted what we'd done. It wasn't entirely accurate. There were some aspects that weren't right, but that will improve.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really, really important as well.
Yeah, I think it's just getting so much more intuitive. I was speaking to a student the other day who's dyslexic, who was saying that their text-to-speech software that they use, they can they listen to themselves. It recognizes their voice and it reads it back in their voice, which I thought was, I thought that was quite incredible, because some of the voices sometimes, I think when text-to-speech started out, it was a bit robotic, some of the voices, and that was a bit off-putting for people. But apparently it can do that. And yes, there's all sorts of tech, isn't there, now, where things will summarize things for people. And of course, we have to put the usual, warnings and caveats in place with things like the AI, that, you need to check it still, it may not be quite accurate exactly. But for summarizing things, I think sometimes that can be, so helpful, because I think the reading is something that I think the reading and note taking, along with things like time management and scheduling and planning, are the things that we in the study skills team very often find ourselves, working with students on, particularly at this time of year at the beginning.
Yeah, and I'll go a little bit further just to give the listeners an idea of how I use the reading aspect of the technology. I could be listening to a journal being read to me while I'm on the exercise bike, and the exercise bike that I use has an image of, I don't know, the Cayman Islands that I'm riding around. So I hope everybody has that vision of me on a bike riding in the Cayman Islands while listening to a journal. And it's part of that multitasking and dyslexia that I can do that. And even take notes if I have to do while I'm on the bike. So it's really, really good to be able to do that. And the technology compared to when I was at school has enabled this.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a world away from, when I was at university and college. I'm showing my age now, but I mean, we didn't even, it was pre-internet, everything. So, I was handwriting everything. So, it's a complete other world now, which I think has been a really good thing. But I was just wondering, and if you could kind of, go back and say, give yourself some advice for when you were younger, what would you say to your younger self, or maybe, people who are, say, listening to this, who are 17, 18, 19 and thinking, well, is university for me? I'm dyslexic. What would you say to them?
I don't regret anything of what I've been through, but coming to university for me has opened my eyes to things I didn't know when I was an entrepreneur. And it could have navigated me around certain pitfalls that I inevitably went through because I didn't have the broader and deeper knowledge in business. And to me, that is one of the important skills. For me, being dyslexic is one thing, in having that creativity, but having that knowledge that helps frame that is exceptionally powerful. That, to me, is one of the benefits of coming to university from my own perspective within my own field of study.
And I think, I think we also have a lot of mature students who, again, I always sort of say, think what you can bring. Don't focus on what you haven't got or what you think you're not good at. Think about what you can bring, because there's all, as you say, there's all sorts of things that everybody can bring, aren't there? With them. And like you say, thinking about, life experience and skills and that sort of thing. And I think, not comparing, I say sometimes about not comparing yourselves with, say, people who aren't dyslexic, because sometimes that's, people do compare themselves, don't they? Like students will compare themselves with other students. And I think it's important not to do that, isn't it? To kind of not compare yourself, say, if you are dyslexic, with someone who isn't dyslexic.
I agree, and only last week I had a conversation with somebody that was dyslexic, and that was in my class, one of the students, and it was kind of they were struggling a little bit in the classroom, and it was a case of you'll find your way. If it was me, I would use do this, and they said no, I can't do it that way, and for me it was a case of As a lecturer, it's not pushing too much. It's really saying, okay, this is what we need to do. Find your way, and then we can talk about it in a bit. And just leaving them a little while to explore that path, bringing that experience of how they have navigated around completing something historically to complete what needs to be completed in the session. And that is for me one of the great things about being dyslexic, I can understand that not everything I know about dyslexia from my own perspective will fit somebody else that's dyslexic.
Yeah,
And
and
it's
finding your
really
own way of learning, isn't it?
yeah, but it's feeling for those responses and how they're reacting, and it was quite enlightening for me in terms of how they responded. So eventually the student did find their own way, and managed to answer the question, and it was it was a maths problem, and they did it, and it was giving them that positive feedback around them learning their own way, and in time, it may well be able to open up to different ways and discussions of how we work, or even I may learn something from that student in terms of how to work.
Absolutely. And I think, there is an element of trial and error, isn't there, in finding your own way of how you learn and how you need to do things. And sometimes it is about saying, well, that doesn't work for me, so I need to find a different way, and and finding that. And I think it's really important that like you say, that people are encouraged to do that, because that can really build confidence, can't it? And I was thinking, just sort of we're sort of coming towards the end, but I think because our understanding of dyslexia has changed, certainly in my lifetime. I mean, when I was at school, people who were dyslexic were seen as being, not clever, and intellectually, not as good as other students, and there was all sorts of myths and falsehoods, and people, it really didn't understand what dyslexia was, and we've come a long way, I think, in our understanding of dyslexia and what the message is that we want to give to students. And people who are dyslexic. And for me, it's really about understanding that it's just it's a difference. It's not, that's all, and that, there's so many strengths as well. What would your key message be? What would you like, the people listening to this maybe to take away from the discussion that you've shared about dyslexia?
Well, I actually thought about this quite a lot over my life in terms of, what would I like somebody to know about me and my own dyslexia or broader. And given this is quite a broad span of things, it's really difficult in that sense to give advice. But I think to employers, to colleagues, to people that are dyslexic, it goes back to one thing: we're people. We are human, and we have a vast array of skills that aren't normative. And if we want a work environment, a learning environment that is truly inclusive, we need to be included, and we need to be considered. And that to me is really important, because we bring so much to the table.
Absolutely.
And are employers getting the most out of that? Not sure, but what we do know is that if you have diversity in your leadership, if you have diversity in the employer base, there is a competitive advantage to be gained.
Yeah.
And that's really powerful to have people that think differently, bring things to the table, and can help the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more, Andrew. Absolutely. And we often talk about giving people, quote, a seat at the table. My feeling, just building on what you're saying, is no, let's redesign the table. Let's, it's not about saying, okay, you can come and sit at the table with us. It's about saying, well, let's have a table that suits everyone, and I think, I'm hoping that that's where we're moving towards, that we are, like you, exactly what you've said about, having so much to be gained, isn't there? So any final thoughts, Andrew?
I think one of the things that we could have, just to help the the listeners is kind of, if you really wanted to lean on things and learn more, there's lots of resources out there for you.
Yes, I did meant to mention that. Sorry.
You know, and we can broaden that a little bit.
Yeah.
Professor Amanda Kirby, some absolutely amazing work that she does around dyslexia, dyspraxia, just neurodiversity in general. I would strongly encourage people to go and, you know, read some of the work, look at what she's doing. She has a really prominent space on LinkedIn. Another one is Kate Griggs at Made by Dyslexia. Again, they're modernizing how people conceptualize dyslexia. I'm working with Richard Branson as well, Ernst & Young on some various projects. Absolutely fantastic work there. There's obviously British Dyslexia Association that I need to mention as well, and certainly for students coming from overseas, if you are listening, I fully understand that in some countries dyslexia doesn't manifest itself in the same way, and at the same time isn't measured in the same way. So I would encourage you to go and listen and find out whether or not, you know, it isn't necessarily your legacy education that's affecting you. It could be something else. So please go on, you know, have a listen and inquire about that. I'll also add one more, and this Theo Smith, absolutely great guy, neurodiverse, and he's such a character. So do go and have a listen at that. But to him, he's always putting stuff out again on LinkedIn. So there is, you know, and there's just a general community there that makes things really accessible for people to go and listen and read about what is going on and the improvements, you know, that or strides that are being made in the area of dyslexia.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Andrew. And I agree. Just, you know, connecting with other dyslexic people and other neurodivergent people can be also just really validating for people, can't it? But thank you so much for sharing those. And really, I mean, thank you so much for your insight and also for sharing your story today, and your thoughts about dyslexia. It's been really, really interesting. And I think for our listeners, you know, if you'd like to find out more about any of our student support services at the university, whether that is study skills, the library learning skills, the disability and inclusion service and other support services that we have, please do go to our website. And thank you so much to you again, Andrew.
Well,
and to our listeners, do follow and subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of our future episodes.